Continuing on, this time we are showcasing Nin the Pain Artist versus Ezuri, Renegade Leader. Seems quite like an innocuous commander and obviously very LV. But truth be told, this is one of the most problematic generals for control decks to deal with. They just get an Elvish Swarm, and the commander's so threatening and does so much damage to you so quickly that you often just don't have the breathing room to escape. And history has definitely shown me that among all the decks that Nin has issues with, and there are quite a few of them, fast, aggressive mono-green decks are right near the top in terms of decks that really give it trouble. When I sit down to play paper games of EDH against people who aren't very familiar with the format and want an interesting game, I tend to actually let them use my Omnath deck, and I play my Nin deck against them. Because obviously the Nin deck is complicated to the point where if you're not familiar with all of the interactions and the tutoring and stuff, it can be just an impossible puzzle to figure out, whereas the Omnath deck, while it is definitely a skill-based deck, still has a much more straightforward game plan. And truth be told, Omnath is probably favored in that matchup. Not a lot, but I would say probably 60-40. It tends to just win a lot of games just pulling away. A fast Omnath, a lot of pressure. Nin's forced to tap out and do crazy things in order to survive the early onslaught, and that just gives Omnath the opening to resolve the big card drawing spells. And once those are resolved, there's really just no way to get back into the game. It's you really have to get a very fast draw with Nin to compete with a green deck. And looking at that hand I've got right here, this is a pretty fast start. Obviously, I've got Izzet Signet off of the Mishra's Workshop on turn 1, but unfortunately I don't really have a turn 2 play outside of playing Nin. I don't have a 2-mana counterspell. I do have the Trinket Mage on turn 3, but by then he may have 8 permanents in play, because this deck tends to be very fast and explosive. So knowing, I've played against the Shum before. He doesn't build bad decks, so knowing that he may have good Elvish tools available, I expect that this game's going to be a struggle. And yeah, he's also going first, and going first here would have made all the difference, I think. I think that my chances of winning probably go up 15 to 20% if I'm able to play first, almost regardless of what my hand is. And that's without the ability to play and draw the way it used to be online until quite recently, actually. If you played a game of EDH online, it treated you as if you were playing multiplayer, even though you were 1v1. So if you won the die roll, you also got to draw a card for your first turn, which is totally ridiculous. Fortunately, they got that fixed. All right, I'm playing Workshop into Signet. Certainly no reason to lead with one of the islands or anything, especially if he has a land destruction spell. I'd much rather he kill the Workshop. Plus, he may chase after that if he considers it to be a threat. He doesn't know what's in my hand or in my deck, and I've had people destroy this on turn 1 quite a few times after I've played something like a Coalition Relic, which is pretty much seals the game for me, because just getting that one artifact out puts me so far ahead. That's another reason to play it early. He is unperturbed and does not care about my Workshop. Instead, he's going to play an Ancient Tomb into Kodama's Reach. God, that is a good start. As good as Workshop into Signet is, that's a whole lot better, especially going first. And yeah, my one plan against this deck is just that he doesn't have Ezuri until turn 3, and I'm able to just continuously counter it over and over again to keep it out of the game. Because the elf decks don't tend to have a lot of big offense. They tend to be just about boosting small things. So if you're able to keep Ezuri dead or out of the game via counterspells, you can usually keep them from pressuring you to the point where you have to tap out early. And then once you can get... Obviously, they can't really interact with the Nin herself. And once you get the activation off, you tend to win the game. That is not the case here. We're just sitting around and casting Nin and hoping he doesn't do something really vicious to me on turn 3. Something like a acidic slime would be death. A big planeswalker would be really problematic too. Of course, the generals. The general is problematic, although I can actually just destroy it, and I've done that before. I've just shot it dead with Nin before to keep it out of play, especially when I had a very counter-heavy hand. That's one really awesome thing about Nin, is that because the card advantage engine is so powerful, you can often plink off early creatures, even 2-for-1ing yourself effectively. As long as it just gains you tempo, and they draw extra cards, but the cards don't really help them that much if you're able to control the board with counters. And you're just building up to a Cyclonic Rift or something. Gauntlet of Power. God, if ever a card says, do not contain me, it's this thing. Mana Flare for him on Forest. And his creatures are bigger too. That is a huge, huge problem coming out this turn early in the game. So he's gone from having 5 mana in play to having 8 and likely 10 next turn. And these counters are not going to cut it, because if you've heard me say one thing over and over again, you never want more counter spells in your hand than your opponent can play, than you can play in one turn. You want to have other things to do, not just holding onto a fistful of counter spells. They don't do you any good at all. Because if your opponent's smart and has plenty of mana, they can just play something somewhat threatening first. You have to counter it usually, and then they play the thing they really want to resolve next. And that is about to happen here. So my opponent taps 8, plays a Slippery Karst, which it's a little odd to me actually. I think in his position I probably would have just cycled this, given that the cycling is so cheap. But he decides to play it anyway, and it doesn't get mana flared off Gauntlet of Power. Moldiah Channelers, super powerful card, but the problem is he's got 5 more mana available, and me being the control deck, obviously if he were just tapping out right now to cast this, he'd only have 3 mana available afterward. And although I guess that would mean he could still play the Ezuri, I might still counter the Moldiah Channelers, and just intending to let him have Ezuri and keep the other things out of play, but the Gauntlet just makes that impossible. So I have to let the Channelers go because there's just too much threatening stuff afterward. Plus I get to see the top of his library, which is actually quite useful. I see a Timberwatch Elf there. This guy's full-on committed elf ball. There's Elvish Champion, which is probably not as threatening as Moldiah Channelers, honestly, but at the same time I now have full, complete information, given that he probably can't follow up with a 2-mana play here, so I can safely counter this with Crumple. Alright, still just drawing lots of land. And I'm not tapping out this turn to play the Trinket Mage because I don't have a 2-mana counter in my hand, and I'm still entertaining some vain hope that this guy will have a bunch of really bomby spells in his hand that he's going to continuously just tap out and cast to let me counterspell with Forbid with buyback, rather than doing the smart thing, which is just playing his commander and running me over with overruns in a couple of turns. Sword of the Animus. Wirewood Lodge. He's got that little tappy guy, the pumping guy in his hand too, and he's tapping a bunch more mana. An Immaculate Magistrate with Wirewood Lodge in play, and that we cannot abide. So we're going to counter that, and I'm actually going to Forbid with buyback here, just clutching desperately to some vain hope of holding on to the board state. This is just what green does to you sometimes. It just gets a fast start, and you're just behind the whole game. And counterspells like Forbid, which are so powerful against control decks, are so weak against just homogeneous green creatures. They just all kind of do the same thing. And there's Ezuri. No way to stop him, and I just couldn't let him have Immaculate Magistrate. It's just too much pressure. And plus, my way to come back into the game at some point is probably Rolling Earthquake. And if his creatures are all gigantic, Rolling Earthquake's not going to do anything. Yeah, and he's got Timberwatch Elf as well. So Immaculate Magistrate would be, provided I'd countered Ezuri, but Immaculate Magistrate would be tapping to deal. It would be a 3/3, and it would be tapping to give +3/+3 permanently to anything twice a turn, so +6/+6. Yeah, that's just, you can't survive that. And even with one card in hand, I don't think my opponent has any weakness whatsoever right now that I can exploit. Alright, well, I'm just going to play the Trinket Mage. Get a trusty Soul Ring. Obviously better than Mana Crypt because I can cast it off the workshop. Alright, so the way out here, again, as it is in many games right behind, is a few key cards. Treachery is one of them. If I can catch him tapped out, I could potentially Tezzeret into Shackles, or just outright draw Shackles or Fabricate and steal Ezuri away from him, which might buy me enough time, but this double Timberwatch Wirewood Lodge thing is also a huge issue, because he can get around the Shackles with it. Sword of the Animus. Alright, fine. Animist. And Jagged Scar Archers. Kind of mediocre card, I think. I mean, obviously it gets buffed by elves and it looks great here, but overall I think it's a fairly mediocre dude. Seems like there's better elves to play with than that, but it seems like his deck is not so much of the fast elf variety. It's more kind of mid-rangey, running things like Kodama's Reach and lots of elves that cost 3 and 4 mana instead. Just throwing it onto the Moldiah Channelers for 4. Ezuri's huge too. He's fetching a forest for free to further compound the shenanigans. Now he can double Gauntlet of Power me. I'm just going to block here and shoot Trinket Mage, hoping to draw some miracle card. And even Rolling Earthquake, honestly, at this point is not very helpful, because if I Earthquake, he has 3 green mana available. He can regenerate his whole board except for his general. And there's potentially Cyclonic Rift, obviously the other big silver bullet out against a Swarm. But he's already got just too much damn mana in play, too. If I Cyclonic Rift tapping out, He'll recast the Gauntlet. He still has 6 available, and that's provided he doesn't draw another land. Could potentially even have up to 8. And I'd be facing this whole board again in a turn or two. So that's not a way out. So even though I've drawn Merchant Scroll, I realize that Cyclonic Rifting here is probably not going to work out, especially because I don't have the ability to play it right now, and he has enough mana to double pump this turn that's coming up. He's got, that's 8, 10, more than enough to double overrun, which would give +6/+6 to everything, and that would be, well, you can just do the math. 24, 29. I guess he wouldn't even attack. I guess he would attack with this guy. Yeah, whatever. 29, 31, yeah, more than lethal. I would be completely dead if he double pumped. So we have no time at all. There's no time to do anything, as frequently happens against mono green. So we're going to just panic and do the one thing we can do, as bad as it is. Merchant Scrolling for the command. Cryptic Command, at least to keep him tapped for a turn, because we need to top deck multiple outs here in order to get past this. He gets Imperious Perfect on top of his deck. Tapping some stuff. Yiva, Nature's Herald, you might as well play that. Which is actually quite a clever idea, because if I do have a Cyclonic Rift, although I guess I can't cast it with Overload, but if I bounce the Gauntlet of Might or Gauntlet of Power, he gets extra mana and can use it right away because of Flash. So I'm just going to... what am I doing? Yeah, I'm remanding it. That's true. Yeah, remanding it just to draw a card, as I still have the 1 mana floating, and I intend fully, of course, to Cryptic Command before he attacks me. And I'm going to do that right now. Tapping on those guys, and I drew Snapcaster Mage, which is kind of interesting, actually. We're not out of this yet, but that's certainly bad. Man, he's got so much mana that he can even give this thing, even after casting his dude, he can untap the Moldea Channelers and give it +3/+3 to smash me for 10 trample. Grotesque. And he gets another forest. At least he downgraded his Imperious Perfect into a Journey of Discovery. I don't know if I would have fetched there, honestly, given how good the Perfect is. But it doesn't really matter. Negate. That is a day late and $1 short. So at least I can get rid of the Wirewood Lodge, so that he can't untap something. Priest of Titania. Pumps the Channelers up, and before combat, I'll play him. And I just do not have enough surplus mana after Cryptic Commanding to do much of anything. So I'm bouncing the Gauntlet of Might and tapping his guys out with the plan to negate it if he replays it, which will slow down the bleeding somewhat. He still has enough mana, though, to at least overrun once. The question is, does that kill me? That's 12 damage, 16, 17, 18, 19. It's 25. Yeah, it's still death. So even with that, even returning his Mana Flare, it still pretty much kills me. Alright, I don't care about that. And he did not cast the recast the Gauntlet, which was kind of cool too, like just reading me for negate. And he's casting Journey of Discovery to reshuffle, since the priest doesn't do anything. Leaf Gilder on top. Bribery. Alright, well, that is a potential out, depending on what he has in here. And I went through all the potential things he could be playing with to decide whether or not I could even afford to cast Bribery, because I can actually avoid dying, I think, if I shoot Snapcaster Mage and draw into a bounce spell, which allows me to bounce Ezuri, and then counterspell it on the subsequent turn. I think I can survive one more turn. So I think through it a while, and I figure, well, if he has Bribery, maybe he's got something really, really insane, given that he is sort of mid-rangey green, and he might have something... Well, a Terastodon would kill a bunch of his mana or allow me to... elves, right? It only pumps elves. Allow me to kill some of my own stuff to get some blockers, although I don't think that would still allow me to survive. But maybe if I keep the Gauntlet of Might out of play, that would also buy me a turn. I eventually decided to just go with Bribery, given that seems like the only thing that's likely to result in some degree of victory. And I see that he is indeed entirely elves. And amongst the elves, there just aren't a lot of elves that are fat. Really aren't too many at all. The fattest elf amongst all the fat elves is this thing. Glade Heart Cavalry. Alright, well, I can play that guy and bolster my guys a little bit. and hope that my opponent gets super greedy and taps out to cast this Gauntlet of Power instead of just doing the smart thing. I see him tap a bunch of mana, and as soon as I see him do that, I know that this is it. This is the end. That is way, way, way over lethal. That is 48 points of trample damage, and I'm at 23. Toast, once again. The Nin deck goes down to mono green, which is a not too uncommon occurrence, unfortunately. But I'm sure you guys enjoy, after all the beatings I've served up with this deck, to see it get its ass kicked pretty badly by a mono green deck. And hope you enjoyed that game. I've got a few more cool losses to come. See you soon.